This is one of those shows that I'm struggling to do an introduction for because we just wrapped the show. And this episode is a masterclass in alignment, in scaling businesses, and how to navigate shame and grace, and how to be reflective, and how to grow as a leader, and how to run the business that you want, and how to achieve the goals that you set out to desire. We talk about faith, we talk about grace, we talk about becoming a leader, we talk about how to build and scale businesses, we talk about how most businesses end up becoming the most expensive handcuffs or a perfectly curated prison, and how there's a difference between a business and a prison. We talk about what alignment really means and why it will cost you everything if you don't understand it. And the person sharing is a dear friend of mine who built a $60 million business and then lost it, and then built a $20 million business and then lost it, and then have now rebuilt it in complete alignment. And in the last year have gone from I can't pay my rent to now thriving in business, in the relationship of her dreams with the businesses that she wants, because she has two businesses running concurrently. We talk about how you're in relationship with your business and how most of the time that leads you to ignore the relationship with yourself. And a very harsh truth, but one that's done with grace and evidence to be able to shift it and support it, is that if you can't lead yourself, you don't have the right to lead others. And so today we're joined by one of my incredible friends, somebody who I love wholeheartedly. She's like my sister. She even shares the name of my sister, who has navigated all of this, who's been in the big world, built massive, multiple 8-figure companies, lost it all, rebuilt it again, and from her heart shares all the lessons and pieces with both men and women entrepreneurs at every stage of their business to help navigate, keep it in alignment, and build and scale your business to have the impact that you desire and the results that you deserve. And so without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to a very special episode on the relationship between shame and grace. Maybe that's where we're going to start. We have a lot to unpack, but I do all these intros off the top of my head. The first label I would love to give this incredible guest is like the pineapple dealer, like the crack dealer, in all love. And we'll probably tell you that story in a minute, because we met on a boardwalk in Hawaii in Crossing, and she was eating pineapple. And I was like, can I have some of that? And she's like, yeah, sure. And legitimately, that is how our friendship started, to like my sister from another mister, like a woman that I admire, that I respect, that also is a breath of experience and walking wisdom in every bucket that makes you successful. And truthfully, probably has way more than I do when it comes to scaling people, businesses, and working on performance, but also is somebody who takes their own medicine. And I'm trying to think of the word, rabidly runs towards the obstacle, no matter what, heart open, full blast, like whatever it takes, I'm going to be this person. And I've seen her do it as a mother. I've seen her do it as a coach. I've seen her do it as a friend. I've seen her do it as a leader. I've seen her do it in every single bucket that makes you successful by every metric that I would consider success, which is deep alignment, having impact, caring about people, helping them make profit for the right reasons, and has nothing but experience under her belt, corporate world, scaling massive companies, and now spends her time helping people who live in alignment, who believe in impact, do the same thing. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome my incredible friend Lezly to the show. So Lezly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to speak with you, George. You're literally a pivotal moment in my life, so I can't wait to get into that story too.
Oh yeah, I think we're gonna have to tell it, because that was, we even had like a live studio audience and an unintentional.
Gold
Go ahead.
pineapple.
Oh, and you have a pineapple. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And for everybody listening to, I have to give Lezly full credit, because she's on the other side of the world and woke up at 3:15 in the morning to do this podcast. And I love you to pieces for that. Thank you. But for everybody listening, you want to talk about commitment? She's like, I'm coming on the show. I'm coming in at 3:30 in the morning. And so I'm way over caffeinated and she's probably under caffeinated, but we're going to bring magic anyways. And so, at the beginning of the show, I mentioned the relationship between grace and shame. And Lezly and I feel like brother and sister, because we've been, quite frankly, co-walking a very similar path for the last year or so, actually over a year, since we met in Hawaii. And I asked her this incredible question, and she looked at me and she's like, I'm really being present with the fact that people are bringing shame into people's journey and not allowing grace. And for somebody whose words I respect and whose position I respect, and also like For you guys watching and listening to this, also the amount of time that you take to be present in your answers and how present they are for you is a gift that I love and admire. And so I would love for you to kind of share your perspective, whether through your own journey or things that you're seeing and feeling
Mm.
around this relationship to grace and shame.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I will never get tired of your words and the way you see me. Um, mm, yeah, what dropped in for me was this, we're speaking of God and return to Him and I guess rebuilding our kingdom in His view.
Mm.
Um, I want to say it, well, I don't want to say it is a very new walk for me. Probably was starting similar times, like a couple of months after Hawaii when we met. And I've just really noticed, and I reflect on this, whether it's internalized shame within myself or like a projection of what I'm feeling versus what's actually being directed towards me. But it really bothers me when I see and hear and feel. It's like when people expect the walk home to be in their view versus his view, and the relationship that like I have built with him or that I feel other people have built with him. And I see such beauty in, I want to say, the difference, um, and the curation of the way that he holds each of us individually. And where some people look at that and they're like, well, your walk doesn't look the same as mine, so it's not as pure, or it's not as true, or are the hands of God really on you? Um, yeah, and it actually doesn't annoy me. It breaks my heart a little. It breaks my heart that there is no space for grace. There's no space for love. There's like no space for imperfection. It's almost like the second that you hear his voice, and I get obedience, I get submission. I'm being on my knees to this man every day. Um, and I feel his grace. I feel the moments where he's like, Lezly, I love you, when we walked in the wrong direction. So we're just going to readjust and we're going to go this way. So yeah, what comes through for me in that is my invitation for people that are on the walk to have more grace for those that are trying to follow in his footsteps, not in their footsteps, not in the way that it looks for them, but in the
Mm-hmm.
way that he's made it look for us as individuals.
I love that. Yeah. And for everybody anecdotally listening, if you've listened to this show for any amount of time, I'm very unapologetic about my relationship with Jesus and God, just like I've been about everything. Right. And also what Lezly just shared is such a correlation to what we see in entrepreneurship as well
Truly.
across the board. Right. And my invitation for everybody is like to let this land where it lands for you, because there's so much undertone
Mm,
and similarities between everything that we face, and both of you and I helping people scale their business or become the leader that they're
mm,
set out to be able to maintain that business or have the impact. And if you're listening to this, and number one, to echo what Lezly said, is as a baby, I call myself a baby in faith, right? Like I've had a relationship with capital God and Jesus my whole life, but it's
mm,
been a lukewarm,
mm.
cold, I'm in, I'm out, where I internalized shame and where
Mm,
I went against the word that I never
mm,
bothered reading in my Bible and didn't give myself that grace. And it was this all internal thing of like, to any journey you're taking in your life, whether it's faith or your own belief system or wherever it is, that the thing that I've seen both in, to echo this, relationships with faith that I've noticed as I've
mm,
walked and come home, and the judgments and the feelings that I've gotten are also the things that led me away from it in the beginning. And I had a
mm,
masseuse, of all people, a masseuse, when I had a critical breakdown in my life, right after Hawaii, where I remember moments in my life, Afghanistan or my childhood, or, when I almost lost my legs, and all these moments where my default was to cry out to God, even some horrible plant medicine experiences where it got dark and I was playing in the devil's dominion. My default was like, God, help me, right? Like, help
mm,
me pray through this. And I end up on his table, and I just noticed he'd never mentioned faith or God or anything. I just noticed something on his desk, and he had a Bible on his desk and scripture on his wall. And I walked in one day and I was like, hey, Bradley, like this might sound really, really crazy, but like, I'm really struggling. Can you pray for me? I'll never forget this. This man, I was sitting in like a foldable metal chair. like before I got on the table, and my like elbows were on my knees, and he rolls his stool over and I'm like hunched forward and he puts his hands on my back and he prays. And
Hmm.
this man knows nothing about my life other than the fact that I'm riddled with injuries from deployment, right? That's what he's there to work on, is like my muscles. And for like 30 minutes, like prophetically speaks into every situation in my life. And I'm bawling. Like there's a puddle 3 feet on the floor,
Mm.
bawling. And I feel what you describe as like the grace and the love of the Holy Spirit and Jesus. And then I'll just never forget what he said to me, because it collapsed my entire unhealthy relationship with quote unquote religion my whole life. And he's like, just remember, no matter what you hear, no matter what church you go to, whatever your faith journey is
Mm.
to just be like Jesus Christ, right? There is no judgment. There is no projection. There is no anything. And I resonate so deeply with what you share. And even if you're listening to this and you might not be on a faith journey, let this be a tickle. But the same thing I see in the work that we do every single
Yes.
day, the
Yes. Yes.
gaslighting of coaches,
Yes.
well, you have to do it my way. It has to be this way or the highway. And I feel like it turns off everybody's innate gifts. And then they end up operating in shame and
Yeah.
wondering why they don't get results.
Oh, so true. Do you know what just dropped in? I'm actually pretty sure one of the first thing you said to me was stop trying to be like everyone else. As you were talking then, I was like, I actually think this is what you
It
one of the
is.
first things you said to me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want to say like my journey to rebooting my business and actually stepping to my power in business was a similar walk, was to stop comparing myself, was to stop listening to other people's projections, was to stop expecting myself to show up like everyone else in my journey back to my power in my business. And I had guides, and similar with my walk with Christ, it's like there's people here that hold my hand in this, but they give me grace to to yeah, like make my own mistakes and walk my own path and ask my own. The biggest one for me is ask questions in
Mm-hmm.
both parallels. It's my mind wants to know, even if my heart knows it's true. There's like a part of me that doesn't get on board until my mind understands it. And so I try to deconstruct things to understand them. And I often find, both in business actually and in faith, that if I try to deconstruct something, people think that it means that I don't believe or I'm not following or listening. But it's just the way that I can't understand unless it's body, mind, soul. I can't
Mm-hmm.
embody it unless it's body, mind, soul. So you could sit here and speak things at me all day, whether it's strategy or scripture, and unless I have embodied it, unless my mind actually can hook into like my own belief systems, it just doesn't land. So yeah, I there's so many parallels here, and I love this. I love that. I just trusted what came through and landed in a place where we can actually speak to people's lives in such depth.
Well, and I'm glad that you shared that, because it hit my intuition too. Is like that the things that I struggled with the most, like early on as an entrepreneur, was like I would have a problem or a challenge, and then it was like I would go look for a drug dealer of like, just give me the prescription, right? And then it would create temporary results, but then
Mm,
I'd be left in more pain and further away from the goal. And that's like a whole lot of what I see. And I actually want to ask you a question about this, because in what you were just sharing, it triggered my intuition of like, number one, I love that you acknowledge that process, because I feel like, and I don't know if this is just my perception, because most of my clients are female
mm,
in the entrepreneurial bucket, but almost every single one of them shares that sentiment, to where unless it's aligned and understood both emotionally,
mm,
in their heart, like it feels good, and
mm,
then they they have an understanding, maybe not every nuance or the
mm,
why or the how, but like just to like, oh, like I can see a logical step or a belief here.
mm,
They don't really feel confident taking action, and it feels like very disempowering. It's something I see all the time. But one of the
mm,
things that I really admire about you, and I feel like is a missing art, and I'm reminded about this every time we speak, is the power of space.
mm.
And you're somebody that from the outside in, as somebody I love dearly, but also know, and I've witnessed in this journey, that I've learned and picked up from, is that you give things time to marinate until those pieces come into alignment, and you're okay in the oven until they do.
Truly.
Can you talk about that? Because I know for me, a weak point, like everybody on this podcast knows, like I'm bullish on space. That's a muscle for me because of how default I go into like action or out of alignment action, or like just give it now and create this temporary relief. And it's something that since the moment I've met you, it's something I admire. And it's whether you flying to Egypt or somewhere else in the world or in Bali. And I'm like, where are you? What are you doing? And you're like, space. And what it feels like from the outside in is that, just as a witness, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're creating the space for those pieces and questions to be answered, for you to make an intentional next step instead of reacting to everything around you.
Yeah, I love this. And I also want to say this has been a built-in behavior too.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have operated most of my life the same, and it's something that I'm still in deep relationship with myself, is just, not probably, when you first met me, I was very reactional. I was like, let's just go to Hawaii and let's do the thing and let's get in the cult of coaches, cult in a good way, by the way, but cult of coaches that have all the answers, and like, let's just go to like the top tier here and just follow what everyone tells me I should do. And we met on a boardwalk and I gave you some pineapple and I walked across, and within the space of 10 minutes, it was like, who was giving who what? Because within the space of 10 minutes, I'm literally on my knees, bawling my eyes out, like absolutely obliterated by your love, I'm going to say, and by your depth of like, you just penetrated me with the truth. And I was like, what is even happening here? I've spoken about it so often with so many people. And it was a pivotal moment because you like stopped the noise of that part of me, actually, probably, of the seeking and the second guessing myself and gaslighting myself and downplaying my power hugely. I think the first thing I said was some bullshit about my failures. And you were like, can you stop fucking gaslighting yourself for a second? I was like, am I? I was like, oh shit. And then I did put space in between what was next. I kind of, at moments it felt like I was stalling. In moments it felt like I was failing. In moments it felt like I was giving up. In moments it felt like I'd gotten lost, and you've been on the receiving end of some of those voice notes early in the morning. Like, can you just tell me everything's going to be fine, please? And I did. You know what's interesting? As I speak, I'm like, I went seeking and then I found my way home.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the beginning of this year, when everything started to turn for me, I'd just gone to like 7 countries in the space of 7 months. And I was like, actually, what am I running from here? Is this space or is this distance between me and me?
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself on my knees, and this was when my relationship with God deepened, because I was like, all right, God, if I got out of my own way here, if I stopped and I listened and I took action from that place, what would it look like? And he was like, no more travel, no more running, no more movement. And so I did. I stopped, I doubled down, and, I stumbled. I hired coaches that were misaligned from there still. I was betrayed in that from there still. And still, and I say this often, like, I couldn't pay my rent at the beginning of the year. I spent all the money on my previous business sales, the money I got in selling my houses. I just spent it trying to find these answers. And it turns out they were with me all along, and I just needed to, almost like in this conversation around space, it's almost like stop seeking space and just allow space. And it was profound. So yeah, I just stopped moving, I stopped chasing, and I was like, okay. And then I started to serve from devotion. I started to serve from, all right, if I make no money ever, What am I in service to here? And then it all started to unfold.
Oh my God. It's and I say oh my God like with gratitude because like as much as that conversation in Hawaii was a catalyst for you, it was also a giant catalyst for me. Um, I don't even know if you know this, but I couldn't even afford that trip to come give that talk.
Mm.
And I asked Taki to borrow money.
Mm.
And it was really dark on this side because of the reactions and navigating the separation and to no discredit to my ex, just my own reactions and rumination and self-gaslighting. And it felt like that whole conversation is you were the mirror for me to
Mm.
coach myself, but in a vessel that was safe and receptive, that was also massively challenging. And I was like, oh, is this what I'm like to coach? Like, and I mean that with so much love. But for those that don't know, like, I'm talking boss, Lezly. Like, I think at one point I called you a man eater, like out of love. And it was like the dose of medicine back because I only share this. I only share this because of faith.
Mm.
I had a breakthrough that entire trip because my whole life until that moment was every single thing that had quote unquote happened to me
Mm.
was the only way that I could communicate and get people to feel bad for me. And so my former pattern before that trip would be like, oh my God, like things are so hard. I need you to help me. Like I can't make it out. I can't do anything. And this feels on my heart to share, even though it's hard to share. But I made a rule with myself and I was like, okay, if they cover my flight and they cover my things, like I'll find a way to make this work. And I was like, but I'm going to serve people. Like I'm going to serve. And my default would be like walking in the room and it's like, how are you? And dumping like everything. And I was like, I can't say a word. I'm
Mm.
just here to be of service. And like,
Mm.
I can't even tell you how stretchy that was for me, but I ended up giving that talk. And then they called me and they're like, can you come back and give another hour? And I was like, yeah. And then talking, I ended up in the water the next day. And he's like, how's life? And then I told him, and
Mm.
he was like, why didn't you tell me before? And I was like, would it have changed how you introduced me? And he said, it would have. And I said, that's why. And it was like this profound shift in me, which then I met
Mm.
you on a boardwalk with Pineapple like a couple hours later. And then we had that conversation. And it was just like, woof. And it
Mm.
was this, to your point, what I see now, and even before my faith journey, being home was like the first time I flexed a muscle in faith based on like I'm driving
Mm.
and like I can create the answers, I can have the answers, but nobody else can give them to me. No matter
Mm.
how many people I hire, no matter how many people, and I used to call it like trauma bonding, right? Now, how many people I trauma bond with, right? Or like invite into my story, it's not going to change. And I
Mm.
was in a very, very similar situation. And it shifted me at a massive level. And so everything that you shared feels so resonant and true for me. And it's like I hate to be the deliverer of the fortune cookie, but like at the end of the day, when you said stop trying to like create space or seek space and just surrender into space, that's me surrendering into what I would call the voice of God. Some would call intuition. Some would call feeling your feelings and your experience and allowing your discernment to take over. But it never comes from avoidance. It always comes through facing it and
Mm.
sitting in it. And I think the point that I would make on what you shared is it's not an action, it's really a surrender.
Fully.
And there's also a semblance of action required on the other side of that surrender. It's not a surrender, I hear it. It's a, my joke is when you ask God to move mountains, you wake up with a shovel. It's trusting those pieces that we hear and
Mm.
not allowing somebody else's input or some coach or some mentor to dictate the action, but at most looking at them for guidance or support of like, yeah, this feels like the next step or one that I should take and one that I get to take, but because it feels good to me, because to your point earlier, it feels good in my body, it feels good in my heart, and it feels good in my mind. And that doesn't mean there's clarity on the other side of it. It means there's confidence in the step, not the result that it's going to create.
Fully. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much. In fact, I think that conversation was what you said to me was, and I was at the end of, not the end of, I'd done a whole lot of feminine embodiment, and you could like see through the boss babe. And it was the first time actually I'd sort of started to integrate back into business me after this journey of plant medicine and embodiment and really uncovering who I was. And the second that I stepped back into that space, the man eater came on, like this mask of like I have to show up a certain way, and you saw through it so clearly, and you said, and this is when you started to make me cry, and you were like, I remember you so clearly, the second that I felt my heart crack and the tears came, you were like, there she is. That's the woman that's going to make millions. That's the woman that's going to lead the world. Because I was so armored. And previous to that, I would have said I was one of the most embodied people I knew, but I didn't know how to show up in my power with an open heart. Like what the world had shown me, or what I'd done previously, was built the $60 million businesses, closed and cold and boss babe and like man eater. And I walked up in this like, I'm fucking hot shit, and it was like ego, but not anchored in my power. And you literally were like, you actually said, do not talk to me until I can feel your heart. And you fully submitted me. I was like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, fully. And I resisted it for a minute. And then it's something that you said, and you were actually like tapping my heart. And then I felt it like just explode open, and these tears came out, and you were like, there she is. Now we can have a conversation because you've actually arrived at the table.
Yeah, we cried a lot together, a lot. And truthfully, like that was shared medicine that was done to me um by a woman, of like, oh, like you're winning in life, right? Like, have you ever turned around and seen the trail of dead bodies behind you? And I was like, huh? And like, same thing. And like that conversation with Brown, just for context, everybody, we'd known each other for like 12 minutes, maybe 13 max. like like let me paint the picture, just because now everyone's like, what happened? Like, we finished the day. Love you, Taki. Thank you for having us all in Hawaii. We finished the day. We're on this boardwalk. We're all drinking like out of coconuts and eating out of pineapples. And it's like this boardwalk over the water. And I'm sitting with Jake and somebody else. And Jake and I were deep into like logical, analytical business. And then like you happen to walk by, and like I saw the pineapple, and I don't know why, but like I just, like the easiest way to describe it is like you feel like my sister. Like you felt like my sister since day one, but I felt this like radiating love, like your presence. And I was like, we had like this quick conversation, and then you came over to the table and then it was like everybody disappeared, everybody, because your presence was so big, right? And then I was like, I'm in this conversation. I had no idea what we were going to talk about. I was like, oh, we're here, like you didn't get to my talk, I'm in this room. I'm like, oh, awesome. And then it was just like this series. And I think it was like, you were so spicy, it like activated like my little Dennis the Menace. And I'm like, oh, is this what we're going to do? Like, we're going to have like a spicy off. And I'm like, I do spicy really, really well. Like, let's play. And then we ended up both of us crying and having incredible moments of like breakthroughs and tears, and the things that I crave in relationships with people that I have, like the real, the raw, the like, all of you is welcome. And like having people that sharpen you and soften you at the same point. And it, yeah, as we're speaking, I'm remembering so much of that conversation. And like, also, we had like 15 people watching this conversation,
Watching.
and none of them were in it.
And they're all silent. And I had this like peripheral, like they're all looking, but I'm staying in whatever magic I've just vortex I've stepped into. I was like, just be right here, right now, and pretend no one exists. I half expected them to cheer when I got up off the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. And it led, and a side point too is that there were side conversations after of like how profound it was for people to witness, because it was both sides. Like they don't like, it felt like a dance for each other's elevation and
Mm,
honesty and integrity of like what we stand for and like what we were both saying to each other.
mm,
It was just, for everybody listening, it's like, as much as Lezly and I joke, it was both ways.
mm.
Um, but now our running joke is like, that was the best pineapple I've ever had in my life. Right. And it's
Literally.
just been this funny,
The
funny
$1 million
moment.
pineapple. I have a
It's
gold
a
plated
million,
pineapple.
it's $1 million pineapple. And there's something that you said to me before we recorded, and I'm gonna go here
Mm,
because you just acknowledged this, like at the beginning of the year, like we're talking 11 months ago, right? Like selling homes, have an incredible child, like don't know where the rent's going to come from, and now you're in a drastically different position, right? Like
yeah.
you have the man of your dreams, you have your son, like you're fully embodied, like all of these different pieces. And one of the things that you share with me and I love about you, because we both help people scale, like we help them scale
Mm,
with integrity and alignment, but you said something, regardless of the buckets that you help them in, which is like people and profit and performance, but you said genuinely, it's like, are you becoming the person that you get to be to have the results
mm.
that you desire? Like, can you unpack that from like your side or
Yeah.
anecdotally for like how you navigate and explain that to people?
Yeah. Mm. We're, we're not actually, well, we are. There is practical steps, there's practical strategy, there's practical processes and systems you put in place to scale a business. Unless you become the version of you that you need to be to hold that business, one, it doesn't matter. So I've had a $60 million business. My first one was stolen from me because I didn't build an alignment. My $20 million business, I sent to the cleaners with a $3 million ATO debt because I didn't do any of the work alongside my growth. In fact, I did the strategy perfectly. I did the systems perfectly. I sold the business, the services perfectly. My execution on like mind versus brain versus heart. So my execution on mind, perfect, which is why I've scaled multiple 8-figure companies. What I didn't do was become the woman that could receive it, was become the leader that could actually lead leaders and stop needing to be the hero in my business. So I built myself a perfectly curated prison. I had the world's most expensive handcuffs because I couldn't holiday. There was no freedom. My son was raised by daycare until he was 4 years old. Um, yeah, so I built this world where it looked great, private jets to lunch, designer everything, Range Rover, 5 houses, the $1 million salary, the $1 million business, the trophy husband, and I was miserable, miserable. And so when I lost it all and went on this journey to find myself, um, one, in the rebuild this time round, one of the things that I had to sit with was the fear of becoming that woman again, the fear of losing myself in the success. Um, Two, I had to sit with a new way to lead. Like it's really different when you're heart centered versus strategy focused or mind focused. And I've got two businesses now because I've followed God's plan, and I actually have a virtual assistant business as well. 15 years of recruitment experience, and I was like, I'm never getting back into recruitment. And God was like, God, what's your favorite thing to do? And I'm like, help women become well resourced. And I was like, shit, that means I have to help them build teams. So I have a second business. I'm scaling 2 7-figure businesses right now. And I have a business partner in that, and navigating the way I'm leading her, the way I'm sharing the business with her, the way I'm showing up as this new version of me has really highlighted all the ways in which, yeah, a lot of people that come into my world often like get people to support them from lack or from their needs versus understanding who they're hiring, playing into their values, not even playing into, just understanding who they are, what they value, how to motivate them, and actually realizing that you're in relationship with them, you're in relationship with your business, and all of these things are reflecting the relationship that you have with yourself. And so if you avoid yourself, if you shame yourself, so looping back to our original conversation, if you hold yourself to past versions of yourself and you don't give yourself the grace and space to evolve, then it all reflects back to you in either where your business is stagnant or where you're growing, but you're growing with golden handcuffs and you actually haven't built a business, you've built a prison. And it will show you every part of your shadow, every part of your shadow. And you get to lovingly lean into that and find grace for that. Or you get to hire another coach, put in place another strategy, keep building, only to realize you're just amplifying your pain, not setting yourself free.
Mm. The most expensive handcuffs, the perfectly curated prison. That is such a profound way to describe it.
And it was. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm trapped here. I would go on holidays and work. It's like I didn't actually ever stop. I would just be in a prettier location.
Mm. Yeah, that resonates deeply for a lot of people I coach and also for myself for a long time. And you said something just because you like to cut my shadows open too, is like the big
I love you.
I love you. I love you. And even to tie it together, it's like you're like, oh, I'm never going to be in recruitment again. Like I swore, I was like, I'm never going to be a coach
Mm,
ever. Like I'm not going to call myself a coach. I'm not going to be a coach. Like I'm done with it. And you know, as one of my friends said to me, well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you know, it's a duck. But
mm,
the reason was is to your point, is like when I built my success with the food blog, every ounce of that success was tied to a man that I was ashamed of. I
mm,
was ashamed of how I showed up. I was ashamed of how I talked to people. I was ashamed of how I spoke into people. Like I operated like I knew the answers to your life more than you did.
mm,
And truthfully, right in a lot of buckets, but not from the right place. And then when I walked away from it, you know, and disappeared off the internet for 3 years,
mm,
it wasn't because I didn't want to be on the internet. It was because I was afraid that I would become that person again, or that I couldn't navigate differently, or I couldn't do it differently. And you said I had to be comfortable, for lack of better terms, or summarizing, with not being the hero of the journey.
mm,
And for me, in looking at my journey, it's interesting that when I got off the internet and I disappeared, it's God threw a lot of business on my lap, but he put me behind the curtain. And like, there's hundreds of businesses that I've helped scale that nobody knows.
mm.
And I realized that like, that's where I belong, from a place
Yeah.
of like humility and alignment that also like brings me joy, but that like resonated really deeply with what you said, because there's also not a finish line in that. Like every time I make a piece of content, I'm like, who's this about? Right. And there's like this awareness. And the reason I'm saying this is because I realize that having the awareness that I don't want to become that man
Mm,
is what brings the presence and the discernment in of like having a North Star or a barometer to check it against.
mm,
And the only way to rewrite that story is to still take the actions, but do them in that place of alignment and from a deep perspective, and rebuild it the right way. And
mm,
I just know that that's something that resonates a lot with people. And it doesn't matter if like, I don't want to deliver this offer this way, or I don't want to do this again. And I heard one of my pastors say this the other day, and it landed very deeply. And he said, when service is at the forefront, sacrifice becomes a gift.
mm. Yes. I
and
love
it
this.
and it resonated really, really deeply, because it's really about like the bigger mission. And I know for me, I was taught leadership through the Marine Corps, and I would not call that leadership. I would call that emotional abuse, gaslighting, and survival, right? And so there was this flavor, and you felt this flavor of intensity where it was like, well, you can talk to me when you show up, right? And blank things that I'm sweating when I hear, and also like, you know, grateful to you for being in that moment with me and shifting me and softening me and shifting that perspective. So I just love your perspective on this too, because it's, you've experienced both sides, right? You've experienced having it all and having none of it. You've experienced like operating in what we would call or label as like fully in your feminine versus like fully in your masculine. And really it's bringing them all together in alignment at a deep level. And the way that you articulated, and even like, I don't want to pass over like it, I know your successes and I know how you got there. And for you to even be willing to like do this work and dive deep into these lessons and now like do it in integrity, it's like also that process is what led you to here. And I think there's a part too where my question for you as somebody who helps so many people with this, and it's something I'm bullish on as a practice because it's something I throw in the trash, but it's also having gratitude for those moments, which for me eliminates the shame, the fault, the blame, and the guilt, but brings this information in for me. And so like now as you look back on like those moments and those conversations and the businesses and all of it, like how do you see it, and how did you shift your relationship with those things to be able to now operate like in alignment?
God.
Yeah.
I was walking through the city and, I had a top story office with river views. And it was one of the first times I'd been back in the city until it's like since I had the businesses. I was walking through the city and I was starting to think about building this VA business, and not even think about it. It was like it wasn't even a thing. It just started happening. And I was like, with all love and respect, this motherfucker. Like, my whole life has been perfectly curated to walk me to this moment. Like every single part of it. Like me trying to like denounce this part of me because I built recruitment in like in an unaligned way, and I would have like full rejection of that version of me. And I'm like walking along, and I've taken plant medicine too, and it's like for those that have, great. For those that haven't, you don't need to. But
Nope.
it's like when everything slows down, and it's like you see your past just like lay out and all the steps that have like brought you to this realization, this like where time literally seems to stand still because all of your, it's like pure presence, like all of your worrying and thoughts and just like go away, and this like perfection of everything you've done up until this point like shows itself. And I went, holy shit. Like and because I did a full 360, and almost to the point of like coming home, it was like I was never lost, I was always found. I didn't have to blow up my life to find myself. And I want to just use this to segue to a lot of leaders when I first work with them. There is so much fear that they can't keep what they have and also become who they want to become. It's like I built all this success being an asshole, and I have a desire to be a better leader. I have a desire to have a more aligned business, but does that mean I'm going to have to lose it all first? Sometimes. And I think for me, what I realized is that I was moving quicker than I was receiving his word. And I wasn't even attuned to his word, but I would have called it intuition back then. And I wasn't trusting. And I was in so much pain, and I wanted to actually hold all of my pain. I wasn't at a point where I was giving it to him. And because of that, I felt like I needed everything to burn rather than grace. In fact, one of my programs, Foundations of Grace, was literally this walk back into, oh my God, if I'd have just given myself grace back then, this wouldn't have been so painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the perfect walk because now I get to shine the light for others. But yeah, it was this moment of like, wow, like everything I've been through, every business I've built, every lesson I've learned, yeah, perfectly curated to be in this moment, to be serving in the way that I'm serving, to be kingdom building in the way I'm kingdom building, to be helping others, whether it's faith-based, it needs to be heart-based for me. So anyone's listening,
Yeah.
it's faith of some kind and heart-based always. But yeah, it was just like, wow, like I have this skill set, because even without knowing, I trusted and I kept moving. And he's always had his hand on me. I've always been the one that, landed on my feet, or, I released an article the other day. I was a drug addict at 19. I was
I
raised by
saw
drug
that.
addicts. I took my clothes off when I was like 18 for money. I was born into like so much abuse and chaos, and I've just always had this gift of just not believing what was being presented. Like it just felt like there was more available, and I followed that always. I was like, all right, I'm going to get up. And again, I got baptized when I was 21 without even really, I like whitewashed God back then, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, do you know what? I was a sinner, and now I'm going to whitewash my sins. And if I get baptized, we're going to wipe that record, that slate clean. But yeah, I want to say there's just always been this faith to fall forward, and by the grace of God, I can see his hands in that now. But back then it was just this, all right, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not meant to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know, it's so funny for how well we know each other and how much we talk and love each other. Hearing you makes me love you more, because I realize like why we resonate on the same frequency, because like what you just articulated was like most of my childhood, like how I can't put words on like why I saw what I saw, but there was something in me that was like, doesn't have to be this way. And like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to run away. And I'm like, maybe I wasn't running away. Maybe the plan was perfectly orchestrated. I'm going to do 30 years in the Marine Corps. And he's like, well, you're going to get medically separated and become a food blogger. I'm like, why does that serve me? Right. And there's so many, like, my brain, like I operate in like fortune cookies so that my, 3-color brain can remember them. But like, coincidences are just me getting out of God's way. And, you said something earlier, and I posted about this on Facebook, but this one lands deeply for me for this conversation. Is I posted, all too often I pray for things that I don't have the character or scars to maintain.
Oh.
And with that comes like this joy and excitement, and of like, oh yeah. And like, as simple as it is, like I go to the gym and get sore because I know there's progress being made, and
Mm.
I celebrate the soreness, and I
Mm.
celebrate the, oh, I don't know how to do that, or I failed that rep, or I don't know that movement. Like, oh, that hurt a little bit. Okay, let's make an adjustment. Like, let's make an adjustment. And I think in my bucket, anecdotally, of like, even in business, like understanding that like the success of it comes down to the willingness to iterate,
Mm.
but also reflect with grace
Oh,
and celebration.
so true. Yeah. And just like I say to people all the time, mm, you've got to create space to become like you said, like to find the scars, to build the parts of you that can hold the vision of what you're creating. Like if I hadn't have fallen to my knees at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't be walking with God, or I probably would have, but maybe not as deep as I am now. In the moments before that, I was like, I'm like, it's over, I'm done here. There was so many depth of darkness that I faced, especially because I was like, I've literally been a multimillionaire and had multi-million-dollar companies. How am I not sure how I'm going to pay rent next week?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like those scars that were formed in love, I want to say. I feel there's scars that are formed on the battlefield of like self-sacrifice and pain and self-infliction, because there's a part of us that seeks pain, like the punishment piece, like I need to be
Yeah.
punished here. It's so, like I sin's a thing, and I don't believe in being punished for it. He loves us purely and wholly. We like to punish ourselves. We like to punish ourselves. And so it's like, as long as our scars are coming from grace and love, and I say this often, if you have a sore on your hand, like if there's a wound, You're not amputating your hand or your wrist. You
Mm-hmm.
don't amputate your arm. You don't cut it off. You're not going to be like, oh, cut my wrist. I've got to take my arm off. You love it. You put a bandage on it. You care to it. You tend to it. And then it heals and it integrates back into wholeness. Yet we find a part of us that is existing in unlove or out of alignment, or the leader that's actually a tyrant in us, or the ways in which we've manipulated to get our own ways, or I don't know, the ways in which we have tricked ourselves into believing that we're not being underhanded because it's just how people do business. Yet when we find those parts as we progress to become the leaders to hold the version of us that we're becoming, we want to cut them off. We want to deny them and reject them and abandon them and tell them that they're worthless. And we want to actually cut into the wound. And somehow we think by doing that, we're going to evolve into this heart-centered leader that can hold, I keep wanting to say kingdoms, apparently kingdoms, rather than empires. I feel that the word's been changing for ages, but
Mm-hmm.
um, we keep wanting to build kingdoms. And how? How when we're bleeding everywhere? By cutting ourselves, not because the world wants us to bleed, not because he wants us to bleed, but because a part of us wants us to bleed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's just this business growth is going to ask everything of you, but it's going to ask it of you in love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard a quote the other day from this guy that I follow, Bryce, and he said, "The devil knows your name and calls you by your sins. God knows your sins and calls you by your name."
Ooh, ooh.
And I love the distinction that you just made because, whether you're listening to this and you're like, oh, they're woo woo and blah, 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 I'm not a faith or whatever, like, great. Or you're listening and you're in that bucket. I realize that what it looks like in business to not be the person to maintain it is when we get it.
Mm.
The self sacrifice and self sabotage doesn't look active. It tends to be an avoidance of the things that brought it in the first place.
Mm. Mm.
The way that I would land this for people in that bucket is like what it tends to look like is thinking there's a finish line
Oh,
of like, oh, this got me here. I've made it. I can stop.
fully.
And by the time you catch it, the pain is too great and you're in reactive mode. And that is that cycle. And that's where the shame comes in and the fault comes in. And the way that you broke down scars is also so beautiful and eloquent as well, because like, I one of my favorite reads that like led me home was the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis,
Mm.
because it's written from the lens of the devil to his disciples on how they change man. And it's like, give him just a little bit of understanding to think it's his idea. Give
Mm.
him enough information to keep him in his head. And it made me realize why the quote, "the devil is in the details," was created, is because the details happen in your head and God lives in your heart.
Oh.
And
Mm.
so as long as you're ruminating, as long as you're overthinking, as long as you're overanalyzing, as long as you're driven by that reticular activating system of memory, which, by the way, has been scientifically proven that most of it's made up to try to remember the 11 million bits of information your unconscious mind processes per second,
Mm.
you're not in your heart in
Mm.
that space that we're talking about, like not actively pursuing space, but just being in space to allow the noise to exist, but to also connect to your earlier point with your heart and with your body and with your head. And so I love the way that you describe scars, because it lands perfectly, because I was the king and have an awareness of it and still find myself in that bucket sometimes. I'm like, oh, things are hard. Gotta hustle. Can't go to the gym. Gotta go eat. Here's my guilty little secret, like an entire bag of Enjoy Life chocolate chips with almond butter, right? Like, the way that we all cope here, because I'm still a fat kid on the inside. But the difference to your point now, and it's the same for me, is that until until I came home, I
Mm.
internalized the burden and the weight out of fear of judgment and shame.
Mm.
And it was like this running bank account that was in
Mm,
a negative balance, that
mm,
every decision had to be in reaction to that balance to quote unquote make up because I wasn't worthy or worth it, which was just a new form of reactivity and self sabotage because I'm not building something new or something in alignment. I'm reacting to things of old and bringing more of it into the future.
mm, mm.
And I say this now, in summary for me is like, I own this. Like there's, 10,000 podcasts of me on the internet, right? Like there's a whole lot of my story written out where like, God, I've like, God forgave me already, but I've like said things where I'm like, oh, God's a woman, or it's this, or it's the universe, or, it's intuition. It's all these different things. But really, in summary, for me, the biggest mistake that I ever made is looking at all those situations similarly to what you described of like, somehow I landed on my feet and
Mm,
somehow that situation that felt insurmountable, it had a good scenario on the other side. And I say that like my biggest, not regret, but my awareness is that I gave myself credit
mm.
instead of where it belonged, who I call daddy or Abba or father or God.
Huh.
And I've realized that even logically now, because I've read probably 1,000 books and studied all the things that you've studied, and we are in so many similar buckets, that every single piece of wisdom or advice that I've ever taken action on, I've now found in my Bible. Like
Mm.
the original personal development book. Of like, yep, like the best business book that will ever exist, because the baked in piece that I've found logically now is the humility in surrendering to a higher power, which is faith. But the humility is what keeps the perspective to not
Mm,
allow that old version back in, or allow the evidence collection of shame,
mhm,
or this weight that I put on myself. And even when it shows up, it no longer feels comfortable and familiar. It feels foreign, and I want to eradicate it
mm.
quickly.
Mm. I love this so much. Not where I thought the conversation was going to go this morning, but I'm so grateful it did. I want to touch on, like people that might be listening, they're like, oh, yeah, faith based, woo woo, whatever. We're actually just speaking to the depth of self leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cannot lead yourself, you do not have the right to lead anyone else. You do not have the right to lead anyone else. So for people, that I work with that are maybe they're touching on faith, maybe they're still shy with that conversation. And I have so much grace for people and their walk. I don't care if you worship 10 gods. I don't care if you're still stuck in plant medicine. I don't care if you're spiritual. Like all I care is about your heart. And I trust that people will find their way home with grace in their own time. And if you have a cognitive dissonance in what we're talking about because we're talking about God, I'm actually talking about the relationship that you have with yourself, the ways in which you are showing up or not showing up for yourself, and the ways in which your self sacrifice is being rippled through your business, the way in which your self defecation is rippling through your business, the way in which you're leading people to the place that you probably fear the most because you haven't actually dealt with your shit. You haven't actually looked in the closet and found the shadows and, um, yeah, started to lead with heart. So for me, I'm always looking at like, what is your self relationship? And I want to know, I don't want to know what you put on social media, what your fucking values that are on the wall say, what your mission statement is. I actually don't give a fuck because that is mostly bullshit. I care about what you say to yourself
Mm-hmm.
just before you go to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
I care about what you say to yourself when you wake up first thing in the morning. I care about how you respond to your team or your business when things are going wrong, because I actually don't give a fuck how you lead when things are going right. The way you lead when someone's made a mistake, when you're not going to hit budget, when you've lost a team member or a client or that launch went wrong, that tells me who you are as a man or a woman. It's been really interesting. I'm in the like birth canal of birthing businesses. So there's been some pressure points. And one of my biggest reflections of like, fuck, I'm actually here has been the navigation on when I hit tension and how I communicate that, because I hit tension in my system and I can feel my words get short. I can feel the way I communicate change. I can feel the ways I want to grip and control and fix. And the first thing I say is, guys, I can feel the tension rising in me. And I need to have this conversation to come up with a solution, but I need you to give me grace as I communicate this, because I know myself well. I say the way my brain works is I'm going to ask you 100 questions to find a solution. And if any part of you takes this as criticism, I need you to know that's not my intention. It's just the way that I find a solution. Even that conversation with people, they're like, oh, I'm not being attacked here. I'm not being questioned here. And what actually happened at the beginning of the year is I got my internal system on same team. I got my masculine and my feminine, harmony, grace, whatever you want to call it. I just got on the same team. I didn't shame myself if I worked hard. I didn't shame myself if I then laid in the sun naked for 3 hours. I was like, what would same team look like? What would same team feel like? And how do I live as that? How do I embody this in my business, in my relationships, in my internal relationship? And so now when I communicate and I feel the pressure, or I feel not even a trigger, it's just I aim for excellence always. And my biggest trigger is when it impacts my clients, because I know what it's like to not feel supported. So it's never actually when anything impacts me. It's like if we've impacted a client, that's when I'm like, I know what it feels like to not feel held. And my goal for my clients is they always feel held. And so when I hit it and when I feel it, I'm like, all right, guys, like I'm going to start asking questions, and I just need you to answer the questions without emotion. I'm not trying to find someone like a wrong here. I'm just trying to understand what broke so I can support you to fix it so we don't get here again. So yeah, for anyone that's like, oh, I can't buy into this because it's not the same language, I'm actually just asking you to love yourself enough to know how you respond in the darkness and not how you respond in the light.
I'm so grateful that you did that parallel, because that was so eloquently and put and spot on, and like right in the vein, and a good summary too of like all the internal pieces, right? Like, and I'll spit personal development quotes on you all day, like what you resist persists, right? And what you see on the outside is a reflection of the inside. But like that one question, two really, but same vein, is like, I want to know what you say about yourself right before you go to sleep and right when you wake up. Like those are probably two of the most profound questions that we can ask ourselves. And sometimes it seems like a harsh truth where it's like, you can't lead yourself, you don't have the right to lead others. That's also an invitation, because
Fully.
leadership is not having the answers, it's not knowing the path. I would venture to put a label on it that it's having a willingness and awareness to communicate from a place of your own self-awareness and
Mm,
create a mutual dance floor. Like,
mm.
here's what's coming up for me, here's how I'm feeling, here's how I'm navigating, and effectively communicating it. Because to your point, in building kingdoms, which we both used to call empires, same, um, is you'll never be able to do it alone. And the only way to do it with others is to be able to communicate and create solid ground for all to stand on, and allow the collection of everybody's experiences, insights, heart, body, and mind to come up with a shared solution, which requires an awareness and a deep integrity with the answers to those questions from a place of love and grace and no shame.
No, everyone's just seeking safety.
That is the game.
Everyone just wants to come home. And as soon as you realize, like actually to your point at the beginning where you said women need their heart and their mind, it's because they're actually seeking safety.
Mm-hmm.
Can my heart trust my mind? Can my mind trust my heart? If they're both on the same page, then I feel safe here.
Yep. It's almost like every single thing I've ever taught you and everybody else about customer journey is about safety.
Safety! Wild.
Safety. Oh, girl, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah.
This was a gift and so many buckets. But before I forget, where is the best place for everybody to connect with you? It's me and you on Instagram. Is that the best place?
Yeah, Instagram, definitely. Check the show notes how to spell my name because I love to be different. But Instagram is, I'm the most active there. You can link in bio to all of my offers. So,
Shoot her a DM and share
yeah.
your biggest takeaways or clarity or questions. And I'll challenge you. And this is a challenge for everybody because I love the word challenge. I challenge you to DM either of us the answer to that question, just with integrity and love, to
Mm.
be witnessed in it, to be supported in it. And I'm sure you can also see from this conversation, like I forgot people were listening to this because this is how we talk when we
Fully.
talk, anyways. I'm like, oh, well, this brought this up. And by the way, I'm the same way. And thanks for calling me out. And there's a part of my shadow I haven't found before. And on the shared mission. And so, like, if we can support you, either of us, you guys all know how to get a hold of me on Instagram. It's at It's George Bryant. And then will you just spell your Instagram for everybody?
Yes.
So the ones
Yes.
listening, yeah.
Yeah. So it's LezlyKaye.
Yep. Lezly Kaye. And I think I told you this. My father and sister's name is Leslie too.
Of course. Of
Yeah, of
course.
course. I think I told you that in Hawaii, and I was like, oh, like spelled differently, but I was like, of course, like, yep, there's my just other sister. There, you're the missing family member that I haven't had. So, um, just thank you. Like, thank you for leading me.
Mm.
Like, thank you for being a beacon and a mirror, and also just such a profoundly deep, caring, empathetic, like, just really like tip of the spear for me. Like, every time we talk, everything you share, like, it resonates at such a deep level, and it resonates with love, just
Mm.
how you communicate. And so, like, just from the bottom of my heart, regardless of how anybody listening feels, like, just thank you for being you, and thank you for loving me and caring about me, and also caring about me to get up at 3:30 in the morning to come do this show.
You know.
You're my sister for life, girl. And like, this is a gift. And for anybody listening, I really invite you to connect with Lezly. And she doesn't hide from it, and she'll share her whole journey. You'll see all of it. And it's a woman I trust wholeheartedly, and somebody I go to for advice, and a pattern interrupt, a reflection, hey, I'll give you pineapple. And then, like, George, I'll let you back at the table when your heart shows up. Like, trust me, it's coming. She'll say it to me at some point, and she'll tie it all the way back to Hawaii, just because we communicate in sarcasm and sharpness with love underneath it. And so I'd say, like, let this be your invitation wherever you are, whether you
Mm.
resonated with the faith, whether you resonated with the mirror, whether you resonated with the questions that you ask yourself before bed, whether you resonate with her story and you find yourself trying to build a vision or an empire or a kingdom that doesn't feel in alignment, whether you find yourself self-sacrificing and chasing, or you feel off and you're not aligned. Like, there was so much meat in here, and this can be the first step. And it doesn't
Mm.
have to be hard, it gets to be easy.
Mm.
And to both of our points, you're never supposed to do it alone.
Mm.
And so use it as an invitation to connect, to share, to lean in. And I think most importantly, build that relationship with yourself from a place of grace and integrity. And then surround yourself with more of it, because there's
Mm.
people who are conspiring in your favor and for your
Mm.
benefit, to help your message and your impact reach the world. And so I will say this wholeheartedly: if Lezly and I can support you in any way, she's not going anywhere. She's in my world forever, and vice versa. Let us know. But I
Mm.
will say this to everybody: I love you all. I
Mm.
appreciate you all. And thank you for giving us the time to listen to this. And so God bless all of you. And Lezly, thank you for being here.
My absolute pleasure. God bless you and God bless everyone listening.